Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 129th edition of the Frank and Stan Chat. And I'm delighted to say we've got a guest with us today, Afrasiab Anwar. Hello, Afrasiab. How are you?
Hi, Frank.
Yeah,
Thanks.
Well, we're both keen cricket fans, and England are playing Pakistan at the moment, and been a bit of a mixed day. It started well for England and then tailed off, and look as though Pakistan have ended the day slightly on top. So, but anyway, we'll get on to that afterwards. How are you, Stan?
I'm okay. A little
Yeah.
drafty around there.
Well, I noticed you seem to have had quite a lot of your hair chopped off.
Yeah, an error.
A technical error.
Yeah. It's not the week either, really, to have your hair.
No. It's freezing cold for those of you just not watching this today. Okay, so Afrasiab, do you want to just give a little introduction as to who you are, what you do, because it's pretty remarkable, I think, what you do, what you get round to. So just give us a little summary of what you're up to.
Right, yeah. So I work for Lancashire County Council as the Equality and Diversity lead for education improvement. So I'm the community team leader there. And in addition to that, I'm also the Leader of Burnley Council and chair of Building Bridges Burnley, which is the interfaith organisation for Burnley. And I do a bit with Danehouse Football Club as well.
Yeah, I noticed that. I mean, what actually do you do at the football club?
Well, with the Danehouse Football Club, I'm one of the founding members, or the founding member. I put it together 20 years ago, and it's still going strong now. Got a really, really good team of volunteers, young people who actually came through the system with us, who are now running it for us. So I can take a bit more of a backseat and just help out when I can. But I'm focusing my time this year actually on off the back of the Lionesses win, actually setting up a girls team.
Right, great.
So that's what my focus is, but still doing bits and bats where I can.
How do you fit all this in? I mean,
what do you do in your spare time?
I know, and obviously you've got a young family as well. I mean, how do you do it?
Well, I think it's about what if you want something done. They always say, don't they? Ask someone who's busy. If you want something not to be done, then ask someone who's got nothing on in the diary. There'll be excuses. But no, I think from my point of view, I've always been this way. Always been trying to help and do what I can for my community, whether that's through obviously paid employment, but also through my extracurricular activities that I get involved in. And then you end up finding yourself. I think the difficulty is I find it hard to say no. So when people ask you to do something, you try to do what you can. And it just so happened they said, well, why don't you stand for council? And I said, right, okay then. And then
I know, but well, hang on, just go back to when did you start getting involved in council work then?
Well, I've been a community activist in Burnley for 20 years, and doing lots and lots of different work. But for a number of years, since about 2012, one of my colleagues who is part of the interfaith work that we do, she kept saying to me, "We need people like you on the council. We need you to get involved." And I'd always say no. Been a Labour Party member for years, but I'd always say no because it's not for me. And then eventually in 2017, I said, right, okay, I'll do it. Ended up getting selected, got elected in 2018, and then last year I found myself as the leader, and it was like, how's that happened?
I mean, we talk a lot about leadership here, don't we, Stan? But I mean, is there any training, that a council leader goes through? Because if you're a head teacher, there are loads of courses you can go on. I mean, what happens? How do you?
No. Well, nobody tells you because there's no formal training, and it's all of a sudden you just either the group decide that you're the best man for the job, or they decide that there's nobody else wants to do it, and you find yourself doing it. But it's just one of those things that's thrust upon you, and I think that you've got to take it in your stride. But I've just made it up as I go along. I think I'm doing all these jobs.
Have you any ambitions for county
Yeah.
council then?
No, because I work for county, don't I, as part of the day job. So so that's not an ambition that I have. But yeah, as I said, I didn't have a plan to do this. But I'm a person of faith. I'm a great believer in leaving all these things to God. So we plan all we want, but God plans for us, and that is the best of planners. So that side of it comes in. So I just leave it to God.
So I mean, how long do you normally are you leader of the council for? Is it a set period of time, or until somebody pushes you out?
Well, you get elected for 4 years. So I mean, I did the first year, but then I was up for re-election anyway, and then so I had to get elected as by the full council as leader again. So I'm in for 4 years, but you never know. There could be a vote of no confidence, or somebody might mount a leadership challenge, and I could be out. So you just don't know. But that's the world of politics.
What's the hardest thing then that you've had to experience? Moving up to this position, and not about particular people, or for you as a leader. What's been the biggest challenge you've faced?
I think that for me the biggest challenge has been that management of the time and being able to do fit everything in and get everything and do justice to the role as well. And because I think at times people think that it is your full-time job, and we don't get paid for it, or we get an allowance, but it's not our full-time job. And in local government, many people will be in that same situation where they will have a full-time job and do this in addition. So the difficulty, I think, is finding that balance, but also you are then, the buck stops with you. All these big decisions, when they land on your desk, and you've got to make the call, and everybody looks to you to make a decision or have an opinion. And I'm relatively inexperienced in that sense of obviously being involved in the politics. I've only been an elected member for 4 years, so that was the hardest bit for me, was managing all that, but trying to put it all together. And I think a lot of the time with politics, what I find is that it's not the people in front of you, the opposition, you've got to worry about. It's those
Well, I come from a more recent. I've been involved in the cooperative movement, and they say in the cooperative movement, your best friends stab you in the chest, not in the back.
My chair of governors once said to me, "Beware of anybody who says, if there's trouble, I'll be right behind you." What you want is someone standing shoulder to shoulder, then you can see them as well as you can see who's attacking you.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? The football manager thing, when the chairman says, "Oh, you've got my full support," you think,
and then they're out the next day.
You're out the next day, yeah. Okay. Well, it's great to have you on, and thank you, Kendra, as well for sort of recommending. How do you know Kendra?
I know Kendra because, as I said, I've been involved in community activity, but in education for best part of 20 years. But Kendra was the head teacher at one of the local primary schools, which happened to be the primary school that I went to when I was a pupil. So yes, I have a strong affiliation with that school.
Fabulous. Well, thank you, Kendra. Always give a shout out to Kendra. Stan, what's caught your eye?
For the feedback.
I know, yeah. What's caught your eye this week?
Well, it's only a small thing, but it really irritated me because normally I read the articles from Schools Week and think, yeah, that's good. That tells me what's going on. This week they've done something about school balances, reserves, and in it says the average school has £178,000 in reserve. And I just think that's a very unhelpful thing to put out at the current situation. Because one, what's an average school when you include secondaries, primaries, special, every kind of school into an average? And secondly, that figure is bulked up by two things, really. One, there wasn't much capital work done during COVID. Yeah. So there's a lot of schools got capital reserves that for things like the roof and the football pitch and the like to be done. And secondly, secondary schools have a much greater budget and a much greater reserve because they're more expensive to run. They are huge organisations, and to try and average that out and suggest that everyone's sitting on 170,000, when I know that there are schools that are close to bankruptcy. I'm sure you do, and I'm sure that's the case of particularly small primary schools who don't have that sort of safety net.
Yeah.
And I just felt it wasn't helpful.
No, the timing of this though, isn't it? Is to, it's we're not going to give you any more money for those teacher pay increases. We're only willing to give you 4.5%, because actually at the end of the day, you're sitting on quite a lot of reserves anyway, so you've got the money to pay it.
Yeah, I think
but
probably.
even if you did have that, if there is an average school, then you did have that reserve. With those wage increases and with the obviously fuel increase, it's going to be wiped out anyway, isn't it? Yeah. So I think you're right in the sense that it's just to preempt the fact that schools are going to be asking for more money, but you're saying, well, you're sitting on all this, I'm not giving you anything else.
Yeah, they were also looking at schools that were in complete deficit, and there are 4 authorities, I think, where every secondary schools in those authorities are in deficit, and yet some authorities where nobody's in deficit. So, yeah. I thought we were supposed to have some fair funding that was supposed to equalise all.
Well, that hasn't come yet, has it? That formula is still, I don't know, it's stuck somewhere. Yeah. But yeah,
I just thought it was an unfortunate thing to print at the time, and it's obviously been something that's been released by the DFE. But I would have thought responsible journalists would have been to start by saying differentiate between primaries and secondaries.
Yeah. Okay. Well, what's caught your eye then?
The thing that's caught my eye is the first thing that obviously is what's been going on with the World Cup, moving on from the controversy, and then obviously the focus on obviously football itself. But seeing some of those smaller nations, or sort of described as the minnows, causing all those upsets, that's the first thing. And then obviously the whole thing around that comes out of that is from Burnley, we've got one of our footballers that's there playing for Morocco, one of those African nations, but also obviously a Muslim country as well, and that whole thing around identity, because he was somebody who was born in Belgium, and he's obviously playing for Morocco, and that whole thing, and it's just something that caught my eye in terms of the conversations, and links into a lot of the work that we do here in Burnley, particularly with our schools and with our communities, about bringing them together to focus on that shared identity and the things that we have in common. So
yeah, it's interesting because I think we talked when we had a chat last week that I'm a keen cricket fan, and that there are a number of sort of Asian leagues that are developed in the Greater Manchester area, and I can understand the reasons why that has happened, sadly. But actually, there's much more we all need to do to sort of integrate those very talented cricketers into the bigger sort of pyramid of cricket, because as it stands, they're not fully integrated into the pyramid structure, which means you may have an outstanding young player in one of those leagues, but they've not quite got the infrastructure to support them on their development route. So if they were to play within the pyramid structure that's been created in one of those clubs, it's an easier passage for them to be identified and to get the support they need. So it's a sort of mixed thing, really.
When we talk about cricket, I mean, I try to introduce cricket at every school I've worked at, and in Salford it was quite alien to some of the kids to do the right thing, let's say. But when I was based in Accrington, you'd see children from 9, 10 upwards to teenagers playing on pieces of spare ground, and it wasn't football, it was cricket.
Yeah.
And I'd never witnessed that in Salford or in parts of Lancashire where I've been before. It just wasn't the game that you on the street corner you played. And yet in Accrington, it seemed to me, whenever I saw a bunch of kids playing, cricket was the game.
Yeah, and it's the same in Burnley, I think, in a sense, is that in the summer you can go to any playground or park, and you'll see families and children playing cricket and even adults, and sometimes playing tape ball cricket and different variations of it. But what that's not transferring into is actually organised, obviously in local clubs, and the pathways aren't there, or the opportunities are not there. Not quite sure what that is, or not knowing how to, get in, or does it not fit in with the culture of the family, or some of the, is it socioeconomic? We're not quite sure what the issues are with it. But it takes me back to when we set up Danehouse Football Club, and I remember at the time people were like, well, we'll set up an Asian league for these kids and in this area, and I refused to do that. I said no. What they need to be doing is actually playing in mainstream, joining the local leagues. One, because it'll expose them to obviously that competition, and they can test themselves at that level. I said, but secondly, it's about broadening their horizons, getting them out of just their own local area where they probably won't go out of. And that's exactly what's happened over the past 20 years, is that children are going out to different parts of Burnley, different parts of Lancashire, making friends with different people, meeting different people. And that has a huge impact, and it makes them much more rounded individuals. And what we're left with, I think, when we look at it from our school's perspective, children go to school in their local community, and then that feeder school will feed into the local high school, and then what you end up with is that there will then be, so for example, local primary school, predominantly Asian heritage, all of them schools would feed into the local high school, which is then predominantly Asian heritage. What you're left with is that some of these children might not come across anybody who's different to college or the workplace, and it's too late by then, and that's why these programs are so important.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's interesting because I'm heavily involved, or have been heavily involved at Bramall Cricket Club. It's actually if you're seeking grants now, it is actually about how well is whatever grant is going to be given, how is that going to reach out to the wider community? It's not about serving your members. That's given. It's actually not, and it's not just about, oh well, we go to this local primary school and whatever. It really is starting to drill down into how you're going to break through into communities that you currently don't have a connection with. And I think that certainly at Bramall that has been a success, reasonably successful. But actually, because there are a number of children coming through, and predominantly lots of girls wanting to play cricket now, so I think that the grant application process, if you want to develop your club, is a good way of driving change, an indirect way of doing it.
But I think at the same time, I think one of the things to do with that is that ensuring that with the grants and the applications, is not going for it because the funding is there, is actually believing in it as well. So you've got to believe in what you're doing.
That's a very, very good point. Very good point. I think it, in my mind, because I sought sort of like nearly £100,000 of grant funding for a net facility. I put my hand on my heart and say it was it was actually forcing us to go out, in order to secure the funding, but actually did then start to begin to think about, well, how inclusive are we, and the issue for us has always been around, the bar and the income you get from the bar, and actually how that's managed, so yeah, it's a a slightly more complex issue, but I mean,
that was interesting, wasn't it? When England won the World Cup, and we saw it with the Cricket World Cup, and the two Muslim players were then stepped out of the picture while they were obviously pouring the, and I think that happened.
Because just for those who didn't watch it, because I think so, Moeen Ali and
Adil Rashid.
Yeah, that just before they popped the corks of the champagne bottles, they scurried away. It was, probably some people may not have even noticed that, but it felt wrong. It felt wrong, and this happened, didn't it, in the 50 over.
Yeah, and I think that's why it felt wrong, because they did that in the 50 over one, and you'd have thought then that it felt wrong, then they would have learned from that. But the fact that and it's good in a sense that they are considering that these two are Muslim players and they won't want to be a part of that, but then surely that you plan for that and there's an alternative put in. So that's where it made it even more wrong.
I agree. Yeah,
there's also a class issue as well in cricket. And if we're talking about getting to the higher levels, I presume you both saw the Freddie Flintoff programme, working with disadvantaged children. And you could see, in a sense, although these lads did really well and played a few games and everything, you could see that his disappointment in it, knowing that the system was not ever going to take these kids through to first class cricket because they weren't of the right background, let's say.
Yeah, it's interesting because we're again going back to Bramall. We are predominantly served by very well structured cricket programs in independent schools. So we have Stockport Grammar, we have Cheadlehume School. Cheadlehume School in the Cricketer this month has been identified as one of the top 100 cricket schools in the country. So, but actually, when you go and look at the first team in Bramall, it's not drawn from those. Predominantly, it's not drawn from those sources. So in a way, what happens over time is the kids that don't have the advantage but have the talent, they are gradually getting through, but it takes a while for them to get through. So they don't get into some of the county sides, which are predominantly picked up through that independent sector, but they still love the game, so they still come to nets. They develop their cricket, in a sort of more over a longer period, and it's not an intensive bit of coaching that they get. It's really that, and it's their genuine love of the game that keeps them going. Others that are sort of like hot-housed, they have their moment in the sun, but then they move on to something else.
Aren't the majority
golf or whatever it may be.
England cricket team private school educated? Isn't that just a fact that
Yes.
the majority of them are, a vast majority?
Yes. And also, again, the vast majority of them are autumn birthdays. That's certainly true in football as well. I don't know if that's still the case, but if you're 7 or 8, you're going to, and you're born in September, chances are, you're going to be a little bit bigger than the kid who's born in August. And that does take time to work its way through, but that's still a factor in cricket, I know.
Yeah. Well, I think it's out. I think the book is that describes that and says it was just a coincidence. They were looking at ice hockey in America and found that the best ice hockey players were born in January. And first of all, they thought it was something to do with being born in cold temperatures. Is it what is it? And it turns out that the league age was from the 1st of January. So the January birthdays were always a year older than the December birthdays.
So is that something you've got at Danehouse then? Is that an issue?
I've never. Well, you see obviously that those September born always are stronger in their age groups, aren't they? So they're going to be developed. But then the others start to catch up as they move further up through the age groups. But no, maybe that's something that we need to pay attention to.
A little bit of data analysis.
Wasn't just that they were bigger, but because they were bigger, they were picked in the first instance, and then they got better quality coaching.
Yeah.
Because they were first team players, if you like. So they got better. So the gap widened because they were getting, not only were they bigger to begin with, but they were getting far superior coaching, time in games, etc., than younger players.
I can bring this back to school now, because in year 4, your daughter or son is coming that way. They do a times table assessment. It's like a test. And bearing in mind, these kids are 8 and 9, not been on the planet that long. It's a pretty crude assessment. They're given a certain length of time, seconds, to answer a multiplication problem. And actually, there's then that factor about, well, actually, if you're older, chances are you're probably going to do better, because bearing in mind the age of the child. But actually, the negative side of this and the positive side, if you do well, you think, well, I'm good at maths, aren't I? But if you don't do quite so well, I think that's where the little sort of seed of doubt creeps in. Assessment's great, for measuring the school, shall we say. But the impact on the child, I think, can be quite significant in terms of determining whether or not this makes me feel confident about mathematics, or this makes me feel confident about reading. I think there are some sort of negative aspects to the assessment process that we have.
Perhaps at this stage, Frank, you should mention the SATs test that some 11-year-olds did with
Well,
ministers and civil servants, I think they were. And the group together came out lower than the national expectation.
and none of them wanted their results shared. They were to be
No.
confidential. I take it we're not going to put ourselves forward for that test, are we?
I was just going to say, I will admit, I would never ever put myself forward. Yeah, no, I don't think I'd fare too well. But I do think, though, I think there's so much pressure on schools, isn't there, in terms of the curriculum itself. It moves so quickly, and the teachers are being asked to teach all these different aspects and move on quickly onto new things, and children just don't really get the time to have that to really grasp it or embed it. And for those children, and it's a bit like we were talking about where you were talking about the coaching there. Those who then excel or do quite well will then obviously get the expert coaching. With those children who don't have the resources or the support at home, or can't access further support elsewhere, are the ones then fall further and further behind. And that's, we talk about levelling up agenda and closing that gap, and that gap in whether it's in sport or whether it's in our communities or whether it's in education, that gap is getting wider and wider.
Well, in some schools, I would think less so now, but it's probably still fairly common that the less able group are supported by the teaching assistant rather than by the teacher. So they don't get the very best. The brightest end are taken by the teacher. The less able are supported in terms of giving them some support by somebody who's not quite as well qualified, probably.
Yeah.
That's not about teaching assistants either, because my son is one, so
you've got to be careful.
I'm not going to have a go at them at all.
Be considered their stuff. What's caught my eye this week is those of you who watch this chat every week will know that my brother Barry Norris was a HMI in Wales, and actually, even though at very different paths, he passed his 11 plus, I didn't. He went to a top ranking university, I didn't. But actually, we ended up
bitter at all.
Not bitter. But we ended up with a very, very senior post, him in Estin and me in Ofsted, but doing exactly the same thing. And so both he and I have been very interested in the history of inspection in Wales and England. And there was a book written by John Dunford, which is this one, which is the history of HMI since 1944, which includes the formation of Ofsted. But this one is the Watchdogs or Visionaries, edited by Anne Keane, who was interestingly, Anne Keane being the chief inspector in Wales in Estin. Because although my brother wrote chapter 5, which of course he'd want me to say is a fantastic, insightful piece of writing, drawing on a number of important resources and various other things. But the following chapter is about the place of women in the inspectorate. And I think I got myself into a view about women as teachers and forgot the struggle that so many women had to establish themselves as teachers. Forget being an HMI. Not too long ago. Even in, I think it was 1984 in Wales, the number of women inspectors was very, very low, and a number of them. There was a time when actually, if you couldn't marry as a female civil servant, and these inspectors were judged as civil servants. So, the chapter goes into detail about how a particular inspector who's highly regarded actually had a long-term relationship with another inspector, but never felt they could marry, because in effect that would mean she would lose her post, her position. And it's really interesting to see how in England a woman called Sheila Brown was the first female chief inspector, whereas in Wales it was, I think, Anne Keane in the early 90s. And it's just this struggle of an inspectorate with perhaps 50 or 60 inspectors, of which only 2 are women, and the roles that they were given to inspect would include home economics and early years and girls what was called physical training. So it's just that struggle that comes through really well. And it took me back to, you know, it really shocked me. I shouldn't have been shocked, but it did shock me that this is not that long ago.
No.
You know, so 1984, the number of women was, I think, 5 out of a team of 50 or 60. You know, that's 1984. That doesn't seem to me, you know, I started teaching in 79.
But I couldn't believe it, Frank, when my mother, who worked at Victoria Station, Manchester, before they got married, and I sort of innocently said, "Well, why did you give that job up?" And she said, "Well, I got married, so I was sacked for being married." It just what's in somebody's head that says, you know, you get married, therefore you lose your job.
Yeah,
That's frightening.
I know.
But we have it even now in the obviously the world of politics, and within the Labour Party itself, we have to still have all women shortlist because, you know, there's not enough, or the representation isn't there, and so that is still something. And we're talking 2022. You know, this is still something that's required and needed. But from an equality point of view, I think when you look at other protected characteristics, and particularly being, when you look at race and religion, we're seeing representation of those groups at lower level in different organisations and institutions, but in those areas where decision making and the real sort of power to make decisions is, that representation is just not there. But then you look at that, could be whether it's in education, in local authorities, in health, wherever it might be, and the representation is just not there. So it's a real issue for us all.
Yeah, it's true in CEOs and leadership levels as well, in particularly in secondary schools. You know, and you know, the opportunities are there, but actually there appear to be a number of additional hurdles that women particularly seem to have to overcome in order to secure those senior posts. And I was watching something recently about well, it was because of the Harry, and I have to say the Meghan and Harry story, and it's on Netflix. I have not watched. I have no intention of watching it. But one of the themes that they have developed is this unconscious bias theme, you know, and actually, you know, it's that sense of having that open discussion about, yeah, what is unconscious bias, you know, because that even at a level here where we've got a lack of female women as head teachers, particularly in secondary, I think that's the issue for me. That, you know, are they subject to that unconscious bias? You know, an expectation that the man is the more strident sort of, you know, sort of, I was going to use the word hero leader, that type of thing, you know, and that's sort of playing into some of the selection processes. Stan, you're going to say?
I was just going to say, I've witnessed that on numerous occasions with governors. You know, we want a man.
Yes.
And you just think, what day and age are we in now? Where, you know, and I can remember when I was a head in Lancashire, and the first head teachers meeting I went to seemed to me to be a collection of old men. Basically, I was fairly young when I became a head, so I saw this vision of all these old men, and that definitely changed over the period that I was in Lancashire. To far in primary, far more a majority of female head teachers. In fact, I accused my advisor once of turning me into the grumpy old man that I'd seen at the beginning of the. But it's changing. But it's when you don't think. For example, I ran some training courses, and because we knew it was expensive to get supply in, I said, well, I'll tell you what, we'll do it after school. Then there's no supply costs. And you think, great, that's helping everybody. And the first thing somebody says is childcare issues.
Okay.
Well, you know, why?
It's the other thing for me that does my head in. Anybody that comes to a meeting with me, the meeting finishes on time. You know, I've had female members of staff say to me, Frank, you're going to have to end this meeting now because I've got to go and collect the kids from the childminder.
Yeah.
And actually, oh yeah, you know, and it's little things like that, isn't it? That actually, you know, it's that my female member, our female member of staff was the one responsible for picking the child up after school.
Yeah.
You know, it seems to be, I mean, that,
Well, that's
you know,
cultural as well. Into
yeah, you
the
need, we
needs.
just need this, and for me, meetings that finish on time are well-run meetings.
But on the issue of obviously the teachers and primary schools, you still, and we still see it, don't we? Predominantly in primary schools, the teachers are female, and then and I've seen it as well. I totally agree with you when you're sitting on governing boards and you're looking at recruitment. But when they're looking for a head teacher in those primary schools, somebody who's male stands a far better chance of being successful. And so, yeah, it's definitely an issue, but I can't believe it's still an issue in this day and age. But
yeah, sadly, I think it is. Okay, well, we've done well over 30 minutes already, so we've got to room 101. We don't know what you're wanting to put into room 101. So what's it going to be?
I think for me it would have to be, and I think just because of my passions and what I've been involved in, it would have to be racism. I think just needs to go.
I know. Do you know it? The way you said it made me feel as though everything else we put into room 101 was pretty irrelevant. Not that we put it in. I don't want to say that way. It's not.
I didn't need to do
no,
that.
But
it's all right. I've been putting it once. So.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's why it's what I would like to say. It's racism and not racists, because if we're not dealing with it and we're ignoring it or frightened to intervene when we see it, then we're actually just carrying the whole thing on, aren't we? We're not, and it's we did a research piece when I was working in Burnley, just after the riots that there were over the country, not just in Burnley, but what we found was quite interesting, that by the age of 5, children weren't racist, or they didn't share racist language, but when they were 14, 15, they did. And what we couldn't get round is what had happened. And what we concluded was what we were saying, what schools were saying, what everyone was saying to children age 5 is, you shouldn't say that. They weren't going through the thinking process and saying, yeah, this is somebody who looks different than you. They wear glasses, or they're fatter, or they have a different, it's natural to have a thought that they're different, and to want to club together with those things are natural things for a 4-year-old. But instead, we just were saying you shouldn't say that, and so we actually put a lid on it of what you should and shouldn't say. And by the time you're 14, peer pressure is much stronger than school pressure. So then it became, well, I can say those things now.
No, but it's going beyond the not saying, isn't it? It's for those who are educators, those of us who work in schools or around schools. And I would say this when we're delivering training for the teachers, is that I know we have pressures around maths and English and all the other subjects, but the moment you pick up on something like this, I think you need to take those 5 minutes to have that conversation and deal with these issues, because if you don't, then where are people going to get the answers? They're going to get them on Google.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is that the answer isn't to say you shouldn't say that.
Yeah.
The answer is to explain what's going on, particularly when children are 4 and 5. It's explaining that some of the things they feel and think are natural things, but it's not something they need to continue to think like.
Yeah, right.
That makes sense. It's it's the same when the highest rate at the time of racist language was in reception. Reported racist language was in reception classes, because the children didn't know any better. But instead of educating them to think differently, we just put a lid on it and said, don't say those things.
Sorry, I was just going to say, I think it's interesting though, because my daughter, obviously she's 6, but I remember last year she came home one day and she said, yeah, I'm the only, she goes to a small village school, and she said, I'm the only Muslim in school. And I thought, oh, somebody said something to her. What, and I said, why? She said, and I said to her, why are you saying that? And she said, because everybody else is Christian. And I said, what makes you say everybody else is Christian? And she said, it's because they're all white and I've got brown skin. And that then it dawned on me and that's one thing that we've seen over post 9/11. Is when I was growing up, I was referred to myself as Asian heritage or Pakistani heritage or in those terms. But post 9/11, when you speak to children, because of the sort of issues around religion and Islam, most Muslim children growing up see themselves as Muslim first, and then what they see is anybody who's not is then seen as a Christian. And it's just a shift in the way that people think, and it's really interesting to hear and see that.
That's really interesting, particularly with the recent census data that said,
over half the country don't see themselves as Christian.
Well, and I would say a significant proportion of those who tick the box to say yes, I am Christian, and not.
No.
It's just they've been brought up to say C of E when somebody asks them what the religion is. That's their lot.
Well,
that's really interesting.
I'm going to bring it to a close and just say how much I've enjoyed, listening to you chatting. And it's been.
I hope I can't let Kendra down.
No, well, yeah, we can provide a score sheet between you and Kendra if you wish, and we can be bought as well.
Don't worry about it.
But thank you so much for joining us today. And
thank you for having me.
Next week we are looking at equity in education, and we have a colleague who works in Bradford who's written a book on the subject. So that's where we're going next week. So thank you very much, and let's hope for a better day for England tomorrow, and that new Pakistan spin bowler doesn't do it again, because it'll all be over by tomorrow night if he does.
And England football as well. Are you going to mention?
Yeah.
See,
any predictions?
It's the first real test, isn't it? So I've not been singing "It's Coming Home." I refuse to until we beat France. Then I might start dreaming. Until then, no.
Have you seen the updated version of it? The song.
No.
It's Coming Home for Christmas. But they've got they've put all the extra things, like the women that winning the World Cup. So instead of 40 years of her, it's sort of 40, except for the women who won it. Like they've got all these little lines. It's really good. And when there's a bit about going for a beer, Frank Skinner says, "But I won't, because I have an alcohol problem, so I don't drink."
Yeah.
and it's really, I just think it's really well put together.
Good. All right. Well, all being well, we'll see you all next week. So thank you for watching. Bye-bye.